You can forgive our viewers if they're a bit confused about the various things involving Section 230, both the executive order from last week, what it allows and doesn't allow. Can you just at first just sort of put into succinct words exactly what's at stake here and what people should be trying to understand about the current debate?
Yeah, so Section 230 was a law passed by Congress in the 1990s, and they had in mind back then sort of the CompuServe messaging board. And they drew a line in the sand, and they said good faith conduct, that's the language in the statute, gets these special immunities and legal privileges. By implication, that means there's a set of things called bad faith conduct. Well, flash forward to today, and those CompuServe messaging boards have become Facebook and Twitter, some of the most powerful corporations in the history of the world, the most control over speech that we've ever seen in history. And yet there's been very little guidance at the federal level about that line in the sand that Congress drew between good faith and bad faith conduct. So that's one of the things that the executive order would ask us at the FCC ultimately to take a look at.
And how are you going to go about taking a look at that?
Well, look, there's been bipartisan, really consensus or at least concern about the scope of Section 230. No other figure other than Vice President Joe Biden has said that Section 230 should be revoked immediately. That's not a step we're going to take at the FCC, obviously. That's for Congress to take. But there'll be a petition for rulemaking filed at the agency where we can take a look at these questions of the interplay of that good faith term in the statute. And again, I think a lot of the headlines on this are collapsing the First Amendment with Section 230 in a very unhelpful way. No one has a constitutional First Amendment right to Section 230. 230 singles out one group of speakers, these social media platforms, for special treatment above and beyond the First Amendment rights that everyone else benefits from in this country.
So, Commissioner, when you say take a look at questions regarding it, ex-Congress action, what could you do? Are there any hypotheticals you can give as an example? Would they revolve around particular tweets or particular holders of accounts?
Yes, good faith language. For instance, any business in this country is held accountable to the public commitments that it makes, including its terms of service. So if you have a term of service out there that defines what glorification of violence is, to use a recent example, but yet you're not applying that evenly, or in the case of the president's tweet, you're applying it to a tweet that on its face doesn't seem to line up to that. So whether you look at that from sort of a good faith, bad faith conduct from Section 230, or the executive order also brings in the Federal Trade Commission and says, is that type of stuff an unfair or deceptive business practice? Again, Twitter, Jack Dorsey, they all have First Amendment rights. What this is about is treating them equally to the public commitments and accountable to those commitments that they put out there.
Ajit Pai, of course, the chair, tweeted last week asking Twitter if the standards are between something the president might write and something that a supreme leader in Iran might write. Is there a global standard, or are we going to do this country by country?
Look, I think the selective application of these rules is troublesome. And given the bipartisan concern, I really don't see a path forward where the status quo is maintained. So I think all of that is something we have to take a look at. You know, Jack Dorsey himself retweeted a demonstrable falsehood having to do with the protest. The mayor of St. Paul said that every protester arrested was from out of the area, out of state. There was reporting showing that's not the case. Yet I didn't see a falsehood label put on Jack Dorsey's retweet of that.
Commissioner, the president is focused on the perceived political makeup of employees at these companies. Is that anything the FCC would take into consideration?
You know, I think at least from a public policy perspective, if you are holding yourself out there as a neutral platform, at least from a political perspective, and then you stack the deck with hardened partisans, I think that undermines, you know, putting the government hat to the side, I think that undermines the user base's confidence. Take Facebook. They put together this quote unquote oversight board ahead of the 2020 election, handing the keys to this group for the content decisions. And who they put on there? They put on Pam Carlin, who testified to impeach President Trump, did the famous Barron Trump line, put on people that have fantasized about President Trump getting shot. So I think that raises a lot of questions about what's going on. Ultimately, how that may or may not factor into the rulemaking at the FCC, we're going to have to see.